Hello, good day, and welcome to another session of Thinking and Working Mathematically. All this while we've been dwelling on numbers, but today we are looking at coordinate geometry. As a start point for coordinate geometry, we shall be looking at identifying coordinates on a Cartesian plane. Again, identifying coordinates on a Cartesian plane. In reality, we don't seem to have a plane. A plane is an imaginary abstraction. What we have in reality is space. Now, look around you. You actually see a void, a large expanse, and that is space. But in mathematics, we're able to bring out a plane from the space. As we always learn in class, as I would always tell my pupils, we have infinite planes in every given space. So today we're looking at this plane. To be able to understand geometry, we must have the ability to picture in our mind. So when you look at what you're seeing, you can see shapes, both 2D shapes and 3D shapes. Can you identify the shapes? Try doing that yourself. And look to the right of it, we can see the astronauts. Is it floating in space? Is it falling? We can see the planet Earth revolving in space. So it's very important we are able to have those pictures in mind. And that's the way we can understand what geometry is. We always say geometry is the study of lines and angles and properties and how they relate. It's not enough to memorize definition. It's very important to see pictures in your mind, okay? So let's move in. Remember, this is Maths and Science Clinic Daily for children ages 7 to 12, and make that 14, by the way, okay? You can go higher. Even adults can benefit from this series. You feel free to reach us through the WhatsApp contact or put a call through directly. Or you can visit our Facebook and YouTube handles, the same name at Math and Science Clinic Daily. At Math and Science Clinic Daily. Thank you. So it's time to move in. Again, here we have space. So with this, what is geometry? It's very simple. Geometry is the study of the properties of entities or objects in space and their relationship. It's very simple. Geometry is the study of the properties of entities or objects in space and their relationship. And by the way, this includes the properties of the entities. And when we say entities, please, we're referring to the geometric shapes. Objects could be 2D, it could be 3D, it could be regular, it could be irregular. Generally, we call them entities, okay? So geometry includes the properties of those entities, their positions in space, and how they link up in space. So today we are interested in the position in space, okay? Position in space. So now that we know, let us look at position in space using the rectangular system. Here you have different shapes. I could see a triangle, three different triangles, three different colors. I could see a pentagon. I could see two cylinders in two different orientations, vertical and horizontal. I could see three lines in different orientation. These entities are on a plane. Of course, 3D shapes are in space. But let's look at the plane in front of us. How do we make sense of this plane? How do we identify the position of each of those entities? Okay, each of those entities, how do we identify their position? One way we do that is by calibrating or splitting or sectioning this space into what we call a grid. Okay, so we can write a Cartesian plane. But this is not enough. How does the Cartesian plane help us? You can see it's now easy to relate. This way it's just there. But when you have a Cartesian plane, this Cartesian plane is also called a rectangular plane. It becomes easy to be able to identify. We do this so we can easily identify entities in space with respect to an origin. This point is called the origin. Mr. Matthew, must it be here? No. It could be any point. It could be here. That means you move those lines to this point, okay? It could be this way, depending on the location and where. But for the purpose of learning, please, since we're starting this, it's important we take the origin to be the center, just as you have this now, okay? So this is the origin. So every other entity is identified relative to this origin. all other entities are identified relative to this origin. To do that, we use what we call coordinates. Now look closely. This is the x. This line is the x-axis. Up here, this line is the y-axis. Okay, the y-axis. This is the x-axis. Those lines have numbers on them. Let's go to the right of the x-axis from the origin. Okay, from the origin to the right, we will have things like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It continues. To the right, it's positive all the way. What happens to the left? It's negative. Take note, to the left, it's negative. So you can see negative 1, 2, 3, negative 4, negative 5, negative 6, and so on. Please, when we refer to numbers with signs, we don't use -1, -2. We use negative, okay? -1, -2, -3. When we're using minus, we're referring to operations. But when you're looking at the quantity itself, we use negative. So you don't call this -1, -2, -3. You say -1, -2, -3, and so on. Now on the y-axis, up is positive. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. While down is negative. -1, -2, -3, and so on, and so forth. But what happens to the middle, Mr. Matthew? I can see 1, -1, I don't see. Well, the origin is always 0. Look at this closely. This space is divided into 4 segments. If you look at it, to the right, this is one segment, this is another segment, this is another segment, this is another. These larger divisions are called quadrants. So this first part is called the first quadrant. Look at the first quadrant. The x-axis is positive, everything is positive, and the y-axis is positive. Then next, you're going counterclockwise, okay? From this way, that's counterclockwise motion. This is the second quadrant. You would see the x is negative and the y is positive. How about this? Can you guess the third quadrant? Yes, x is negative, y is negative. And the fourth quadrant, what do you observe? Beautiful, x is positive, y is negative. Now that we know what the Cartesian plane is, or the Cartesian plane is, we know what the coordinates are. In our words, how do we put them together? It's very simple. The Cartesian or rectangular plane clearly divides or partitions the space into x coordinates and y coordinates. Then what are coordinates? Very simple. Coordinates are numbers or numeric markers that help us identify precisely a position in space. Numbers or numeric markers that help us identify precisely a position in space. We call those numbers or markers coordinates. Now that we understand what Cartesian or rectangular plane is and coordinates, it's time to look at coordinate geometry. Hey, what is coordinate geometry? It's simple. You bring together coordinates, you bring together geometry, what you have is coordinate geometry. So let's look at this. Coordinate geometry deals with coordinates of entities in space. It uses the form x, y to identify points. That is for a 2D plane. We use x, y. X comes before y. Always remember that. The x coordinate before the y coordinate. But there is also what we call the space, which has to do with 3D. For a space or for the space, we're using the x, y, z. But let's stick with the plane at this level of this study, okay? X, y. So we have right in front of us. Now it's time to pay close attention to how we identify coordinates. We have the triangle ABC, and we have 3 other points P, Q, and R with the Cartesian or the rectangular plane there. So how do we identify those points? Please, you read the x value before the y value. So let's start with A. Pay close attention. Do you see A here? See this point? Look at the x value. What is that? -5. Look at the y value. What is that? 8. So the coordinates of A would be -5, 8. The x value before the y value. Now let's go to B. Look at B. What is the x value? -7. What is the y value? 5. So the coordinates of B would be -7, 5. Beautiful. Let's go to C. Now that we've known for A and B, the same thing with C. If you look at C, This is 8, the x value -3, and the y value 5. So what would be the coordinate is always x before the y, so -3, 5. Okay, now that we're done with triangle ABC, we know the vertices of A, B, and C, of course, and the coordinates. We know A value, A coordinates, we know the B coordinates, and we know the C coordinates. Let's look at points P, Q, R. Now for P, what are the coordinates of P? This is the point, this is 6 on the x, and this is 6 on the y, so it's x, y, which is 6, 6. That's the coordinates. Okay, let's look at R. For R, look at the x. Okay, always point towards the x. It doesn't mean you must always go down, go towards the axis. In this case, we're moving up to where we have x before you try y, okay? You check for x before you look up y. So that of x for R is 8 and y is -3. So the coordinates become 8, -3. So the coordinates of R are 8, -3. Now let's look at the coordinates of Q. This is Q, of course. Q, x before y. Okay, remember that, x before y. So x value is -6, y value is -5. So the coordinates of Q would be -6, -5. So that's it. Now what if we want to link points to form a geometric shape? Like in this case, we want to link P, Q, R to form, what shape would that give us? 3 vertices? That's a triangle. So you may want to use your ruler to do that. Now I'm going to do that. We have a triangle. So that's how to generate shapes on the Cartesian plane. What you do to generate shapes on the Cartesian plane, you first identify those points on the plane, then link the points with lines to form the shape. Okay, beautiful. Now that you know it, I believe you've learned a thing or two from this session. Remember, this is mathematics. Now it's your turn, but let's have a recap of what we've done so far. We learned what geometry is, a simple definition. From there we went into coordinate geometry, and then we say, okay, coordinate geometry, we went into what coordinates are. Okay, and to help us further, we studied the Cartesian plane, and we say the Cartesian plane is also called a rectangular plane. So now that you know it, remember those keywords: geometry, coordinate geometry, coordinates, the Cartesian plane, and the rectangular plane. It's not just enough to know them, understand them, have a mental picture in your mind. That way you can answer any question from anywhere. It's your turn. Let's go. At this point, you want to pause this video and then answer these questions, very important. And when you're done, you flip over to the next scene and answer those questions, very important. Again, you have questions 1 and 2, and then you have questions 3, 4, and 5. Thank you very much. Feel free to reach me, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel and like and follow our Facebook page. Thank you. Have a lovely day.